Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, it looks like the U.S. is once again having wild celebrations of another country they got to invest $1 trillion from. But as we know, the likelihood of it actually occurring in the way they think is somewhere between slim and none.
Yeah, basically, this is absolutely the case. And it kind of juxtaposes well with the fact of the reality of how, in this case, we're talking about Saudi Arabia and the United States. But equally, on the flip side, we can talk about this in the context of the relationship between the Saudis and the Chinese, where, to put it diplomatically, there is substance behind their investments. There's substance behind the commitment that both countries have to each other. With regards to the US and Saudi Arabia, there's a bit of a track record with the Trump administration in that we had similar wild, exaggerated tales of massive Saudi investment in the United States, and it turned out in the end to be nothing more than 5, 10 billion, sorry, dollars of investment, and the rest never came to pass. And it's worth putting this in the context that Trump visited Riyadh around about 6 months ago, and then the figure was 600 billion. And from people I know in Saudi, they just laughed and went, "This is so ridiculous that we're never going to invest a fraction of that." And now it's apparently it could be up to 1 trillion. You know, and it's not even, investing in the United States in some senses. Yes, some of it in principle, if it was true, and I think it's highly questionable, but some of it in apparently revolves around the Saudis putting data centers in their own country. So that doesn't materially benefit the United States in terms of, well, here's investment, so we're going to employ Americans in that regard. Yes, the argument is it indirectly benefits them. But when you start to look and scratch below the surface of what is being proposed, you have to start, I think, with the issue of the US and Saudi signing apparently some nuclear cooperation pact. Um, and immediately the Americans came out and stipulated that Saudi Arabia couldn't enrich their own uranium or reprocessing spent fuel because the belief is that's a step towards having your own nuclear weapons, which the Saudis apparently are not allowed to have. Well, to put this in context, the Saudis and the Chinese have been working for years, very, very quietly and under the radar, on nuclear cooperation. Some of those developments are well advanced, and this is one of these things, it's a pledge. It is not a contractual obligation to do anything. It's saying, oh, well, we'll have partnership and some sort of projects in the future. And we'll have American companies as preferred partners. I mean, there's no detail in it because if there was detail, you would have an agreement that was signed between a US company, or maybe several US companies, and a Saudi Arabia company that would say, we are going to commit to building X numbers of nuclear power plants in Saudi Arabia, utilizing US companies. Here's the contractual obligation. This is the terms. This is what, in a broad sense, what that's going to cost. There's none of that. And again, this is just the United States pontificating, making statements, and meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is actually working on such collaboration and cooperation with the Chinese, where there is a commitment to real projects with real entities of both countries. And before I hand over to Ken, because obviously we can split discussing this, it's worth noting that the only thing you may regard as being something of substance is that Saudi Aramco, but it's only signed apparently 17 MOUs. That they're not. That's just an understanding of maybe we can work with US companies. And but it's been valued at something like 30 billion. Now, for me, that's probably likely to end up being the substance of this, whereby it'll turn into not 17 MOUs or pledges or tentative agreements, but maybe five or six, and the investment will end up being $10 billion or something like that. That's the reality of this. All this talk of $1 trillion is just Trump plucking figures out of the air to make it look as though people still want to invest in the United States, which they don't, and that people are still committed to using the dollar, which they're not, which is why, of course, the United States wants to use stable coins because that's the new dollar. Because you might not like the old dollar, but you'll love the new dollar because it's totally different, even though, of course, to all intents and purposes, it amounts to the same thing.
Exactly. And I think real quick, we need to go back and, take a look at the original agreement, the 1973 petrodollar agreement and what it entailed. And there are ties into this alleged understanding that Trump and MBS, came to, or at least Trump said is happening today. Obviously, 1973, the oil crisis, and the U.S. was able to make a deal with the House of Saud that they would di distribute oil, they would keep prices down, and in exchange, the U.S. would help defend them, defend the kingdom, recognize their sovereignty, as well as Saudi Arabia would take the money that they got from oil sales and buy treasuries, invest in the U.S. debt. Well, fast forward to today, of course, and at one of the caveats, besides arms, the F-35 was being mentioned, support, and that was that Saudi Arabia would buy more U.S. debt. That was one of the hopes and intentions. And I guess that's now being called investment. So when you take a look at Japan, obviously there was a point where the Trump administration, Trump himself, said Japan's going to invest $600 billion or $500 billion. The UAE is going to do it. All these other nations are going to, and it was funny because he started out early in his administration where he said there was $5.6 trillion worth of deals. And then the next interview was 6 trillion, and it worked its way up to 10 trillion. And now we have another trillion. Ironically, when Saudi Arabia only has a GDP of about $1.4 trillion, where they're going to get the money. So, yeah, the whole thing really is about keeping this positive spin in the media and in the public's eye about how great we're doing and how everybody is standing with us and investing in America. But as you mentioned before, really the true investor has been China, and the Trump administration probably takes a look at that, and it's one of the reasons they're trying to get rid of Chinese influence and property ownership here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth mentioning there was a statement that came out that a US company, I think it was MP Materials, was going to build a rare earths refinery in Saudi Arabia in conjunction with the US Department of Defense. And there's a Saudi mining company called Mardan. Now, that's to obviously have processing of critical minerals in, of course, West Asia, in this case, Saudi. Now, my question regarding that is, why isn't the United States building a rare earths refinery in the United States? I mean, it's talking about wanting to remove dependencies. Why is it building it there and not in its own country? That is an immediate question. that would need to be answered. And obviously, the question is, where does this Saudi Arabian company source the rare earths from to do the processing, and what's the specific detail? Now, I'm not saying the deal isn't legitimate, of course not, but why is it the case that you would go and build it in Saudi Arabia? The implication is you can't build it in the United States. Now, that could be for environmental reasons as one thing, because it's a very dirty process, processing rare earths. But again, I'd like to see the detail and what specifically they're proposing there. Another point I think worth making is this whole issue where the US and Saudi are supposed to sign this MOU with regards to AI, which would give the Saudis access to US technology. Now, again, the question with regards to that is why is the United States not putting data centers in the United States? Why are they proposing to put them in Saudi Arabia? Well, for me, I think it's a question that the United States doesn't have the capacity in terms of energy to be able, you can build these facilities but not power them. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the leading power company in Saudi Arabia, which is called ACWA Power, actually has outsourced over half of its projects to, guess what, the Chinese. Why are they doing it? Because they say that Chinese companies are leaders in engineering and procurement and construction and the cost effective or cost efficiency and the technology. And this includes things like AI, cloud computing, etc., etc., and that they've been awarded key contracts all over Saudi Arabia, including in that so-called City of the Future NEOM and EOM. I'm sure people have heard of that. And therefore, the question is, well, to what extent are these contracts going to be awarded to the Chinese, and what does it mean in reality for the US's capability to put data centers in Saudi Arabia? And then there's all the power consideration, etc., to do that. But again, why is the United States putting key data centers, no disrespect to Saudi, but you kind of regard that as a bit of a security issue? I mean, if I was putting key data centers in, with all due respect, if I was the Chinese, I wouldn't put them in Russia. And if I was Russia, I wouldn't put them in China. That's not being, disrespectful. You want them at home for obvious reasons, because they potentially are a massive security threat. Well, you have far more control over those in your own country as opposed to putting them somewhere else. So again, that for me seems a bit of a weird development. Then there's this whole issue where I remember last time around in Trump 1.0, there was all this talk about buying F-35s, and it never happened, and buying other US military hardware, and it never happened. And I'm sure the Israelis are thrilled about the US selling F-35s to the Israelis. So again, when you just think about this for 30 seconds, you have to start questioning any of the substance. There's never mind, of course, there's no deals in that sense. It's just all promises, pledges, but nothing of any substance. Okay, the thing to do with rare earths does look like it has substance. So where it's applicable, we'll say it's applicable. But a lot of this is just superficial claims that have no substance attached to them whatsoever.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things with the United States, and this is something they're going to have to deal with long after Trump gets out of office. It was only in 2023 and then again in 2024 that a nuclear reactor came online, first one in 30 years. Likewise, the United States has not built a new oil refinery in over 50 years. So, with all the regulation, the regulatory red tape, and the fact that many states now bought in and sold out to the Green New Deal, you take a look at what's happening in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. They are their infrastructure and their energy has led to consumer costs that now are being politically restrictive. So the United States is not prepared to do what we've seen China do over the last 10 to 15 years in expanding the infrastructure. Plus, there's also the concept, the problem with water. And when you talk about also something else that's recently come up, these data centers, that's going to demand an extraordinary amount of energy, an extraordinary amount of water, and more people within the states are saying, no, we don't want this. We're not going to give up our lifestyles and our ability to live within a community because you want some big newfangled data center to keep up with the Joneses, i.e., China, in this AI rush. So that's been a big thing. But I think there's also a one key factor too that I think Trump focuses on Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia hasn't fully gone 100% into the BRICS and the BRICS sphere. They're playing, they're doing really what China and Russia has said that the BRICS was about is be a part of us, but you can also be a part of other organizations or work with other partners. You're not limited to having to be the BRICS. But Trump has this mindset that it's us versus them versus a mutual consideration that sovereign nations can make choices and by getting into into Saudi Arabia, I think Trump wants to try to cut them off before they fully move into the BRICS camp, rather than move away from the United States because they already have in selling oil in yuan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth mentioning as well the following that um, there's already procurement in place for Saudi's first nuclear power plant at Douai. There's bidders including the Chinese, the Russians, I think it's the French, and maybe South Korea. There's no bid put in by the United States to be part of this. Okay, there's this thing going on with the United States now. What it means in reality is highly debatable. But again, this is one of these things. As I said, China has been working very quietly with the Saudis. The US was very angry about this because they're very worried about the whole issue of uranium enrichment. And I mean, and how long is Saudi going to tolerate being told, well, I'm sorry, you can't be allowed to enrich uranium in your own country, where countries like Japan and South Korea are allowed to do so. The Israelis are allowed to do so. And the Saudis are not very happy about this, and it thinks it has a sovereign right to enrich uranium within its own borders. It wants full control over the sort of whole nuclear power cycle and the process of doing it. And the Chinese are very happy to help in this regard. I mean, bearing in mind as well that Saudi's nuclear programs overseen, not that I'm a fan of the IAEA or anything of that nature, but it's not as though they're going to do something and they're suddenly going to decide they want to manufacture nuclear weapons. But again, it's one of those things when you start to scratch below the surface, you understand developments that are going on with other partners in the world, and particularly the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese have got huge amounts of investment and projects going on in Saudi and Saudi in China. It's very much under the radar. They're, Saudi Arabia is not going to wreck its relationship with the Chinese on the basis of some some sort of spurious promise to do stuff with the US. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the Trump administration's all about, well, let's say something. In a few weeks, it won't matter. People won't remember because, like all these deals, they end up amounting to next to nothing. And it happened with Trump 1.0, and you can virtually guarantee it'll be exactly the same with Trump 2.0.
Yeah, I think in the end, Trump is running out of allies to make demands on, especially after the video we put out yesterday regarding Japan, one of its longest standing allies, class vassals. Any final thoughts you wanted to add to this, Paul?
No, it's fine.
To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.